actually filling in for Dr. John Radwan, who is the director of the Institute for Communication and Religion. And so therefore, for a year, I get to be the interim director, and so far it's been very, very interesting. Dr. Radwan is on sabbatical this year, so we certainly wish him well. Launched in the fall of 2017, the Institute for Communication and Religion within the College of Human Development, Culture, and Media provides a nexus for ongoing scholarly exploration of communication topics critically important to religion and society. Designed to enhance the universities and the college's sustained leadership in fostering open, clear dialogue and study between religious believers and the broader public, the Institute serves to enrich the community by hosting scholarly panels, organizing curriculum development workshops, and conducting outcome-based research. We are truly privileged to have a very special lecturer this afternoon, Rabbi Irvin Ungar, who will bring to us a lecture that could be described as multidimensional in its scope. I'm very pleased that Dean Crable, the founding dean of the College of Human Development, Culture, and Media, will introduce to us Rabbi Irvin Ungar and his unique scholarly background. Before I invite Dean Crable to the podium, however, I would like to express my thanks and appreciation to the ICR, the Institute for Communication and Religion, steering committee members, to Dr. James Kemble, to the administrators and staff of the Office of the Dean, to Farnsworth Hendrickson and the technology team, so over on the camera there, to Ms. Lorraine Joyce and the ICR graduate assistant, Ethan Wojciechowski. I said it perfectly before, Ethan, but Ethan's in the back. So I practiced his name as one of the beautiful Polish names. Okay. And I also thank anyone else whom I may have overlooked. Okay, I had lots of help with this, and your assistance was very crucial, and it was invaluable in order to realize what it is we're going to experience this afternoon. Okay, without any further ado, please welcome Dean Crable, the founding dean of the College of Human Development and Culture and Media, to the podium.
Thank you, Professor Thurman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I was waiting for everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Brian Crable. I am the new Dean of the College of Human Development, Culture, and Media, and I'm pleased to be helping launch this year's program for the Institute for Communication and Religion. The Institute is a wonderful example of the leading role that Seton Hall and our college seek to play in our contemporary moment. At a time when violence in the Middle East again touches the lives and hearts of so many in our community, the Institute is here to play a vital role in fostering interreligious dialogue and hosting events like our lecture today. And today we are particularly fortunate to be welcoming former pulpit Rabbi Irvin Ungar, who to my mind perfectly embodies the mission of the ICR. And in part I say this because in addition to his rabbinical ordination, he holds a Master's of Sacred Theology from the New York Theological Seminary. Here is Jewish-Christian dialogue in the flesh. Moreover, his work has both a contemporary and historical relevance, one pointing us to the especially critical role that art can play in revealing oppressive fault lines and the consequential rhetorical construction of the other to be cast out. Rabbi Ungar is the world's foremost expert on the art of Arthur Szyk and the tireless force behind the Szyk Renaissance. He's curated and consulted for numerous Szyk exhibitions at major institutions worldwide, including the New York Historical Society, the Fine Art Museums of San Francisco, the Deutsche Historic Museum of Berlin, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the Library of Congress. Rabbi Irvin is the author of Arthur Szyk, Soldier in Art, and Justice Illuminated, the Art of Arthur Szyk. His most recent book, Arthur Szyk Preserved, Institutional Collections of Original Art, was published in 2023. And additionally, Rabbi Ungar is the co-producer of the documentary film Soldier in Art, Arthur Szyk, and the publisher of the luxury limited edition of the Szyk Haggadah. He also served as the curator of the Arthur Szyk Society and its traveling exhibition program, and continues lecturing and speaking on university campuses, such as our own, museums, and other venues around the world. So as you can tell, we have a very distinguished visitor today. As The Atlantic wrote in 2014 in a profile of Rabbi Ungar's work, quote, "During World War II, Szyk engaged in a one-man war against Hitler's persecution of the Jews, and also served as a one-man army against the Axis. He raised money for the Chinese and the Czechs, for the displaced Poles and the tattered Brits, and the soldiers of the Commonwealth of Australia and New Zealand. During the war and afterwards, his art drew attention to the Native American struggle and to the racism directed toward Black Americans, and defended the Muslims in Indonesia against the Dutch in 1948, unquote." And here's a passage from the profile that I especially love, since it captures the import of Rabbi Ungar's work. Quote, "Almost without exception, Szyk's art was never ambiguous or abstract." And here's a quote from Rabbi Ungar. "It almost always had a common theme: freedom, not tyranny, justice, not oppression, which when combined with the uniqueness of his style is why Szyk became one of the leading political artists of the first half of the 20th century, unquote. And I think that sets the stage for what we're about to listen to today, and I think that's, again, a kind of message that I think resonates, again, especially in our current moment. So it is my sincere pleasure to welcome Rabbi Irvin Ungar to our campus and our new college. Please now also join me in welcoming him to the podium to give his lecture, Injustice Illuminated, the Holocaust Art of Arthur Szyk.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Everybody can hear me okay? I hope, trust. And let me just say I want to thank Professor Jim Kimball, with whom I've had a decade-long relationship. We're trying to figure out earlier how we met. I don't really know, and I don't remember. And I appreciate, Gloria, all the work you've done to help facilitate my coming here. I must tell you, I have two connections to Seton Hall University. I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey a long time ago. And when I was in high school, you had a basketball player here who was one of my idols. And I'm sure no one here knows his name or remembers him. I actually checked to see if he played in the NBA. But he was an All-American when he was here. His name was Nick Workman. Anybody ever hear that name? You did?
Yeah.
How do you know him?
Well, my grandpa played basketball here, so I'm familiar with the Seton Hall history.
That's very interesting, because when I was in high school, I knew Nick Workman, and he played for Seton Hall. So that's my connection, one connection to Seton Hall. The other is that about 4 or 5 years ago, I was called upon to lecture at the 50th anniversary of the signing of Nostra Aetate at a Jesuit Catholic university, and its name was Seton Hill. And I thought it was Seton Hall, but Seton Hill is in, many of you may know, Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is not far from my undergraduate school, which you've never heard of, Washington and Jefferson College in Washington, Pennsylvania. How a guy from California or Trenton, New Jersey ends up there, I'm not quite sure, but those are my two connections, because I thought Seton Hill was Seton Hall, and I remember Nick Workman from my college days, so this may be the only time that Nick Workman is his name is being used or quoted in a live stream, half a century after he played basketball here, but nonetheless. This presentation, and I wrote this out very carefully because my presentation sort of changed in light of events during this past weekend. I'm giving a talk about the Holocaust art of Arthur Szyk, and yet it's hard for me to ignore events that have taken place this past Saturday. So this is not a normal presentation for me. I've given about a historical Jewish artist and his role during the Holocaust in the 1930s and the 1940s. The context of this presentation is unlike any of the hundreds of talks that I've given across college campuses and talks that I've given in Germany, Europe, and in Israel. And in fact, it's different for one reason. And that's because we can't really ignore the events of last Saturday and Sunday, whereby so many of the themes of hatred, and the hatred of Jews and mass murder, recall the Holocaust, about which I will be speaking, and the slaughter of innocents that now have unfolded before our very eyes. It's not the events of 80 years ago, but it is of this past week. I'm here today to speak with you about a World War II Polish Jewish artist who immigrated to America in 1940 and who saw himself as an artist fighting against evil. He called himself a soldier in art, Arthur Szyk. He went on to become the leading anti-Nazi, anti-fascist, anti-terror artist in America during World War II. He used to say, "Art is not my aim, it's my means." As my talk today was prepared well before Hamas terrorists crossed the border from Gaza into Israel, specific to murder Jews, I shall really stick to my script of teaching you about Arthur Szyk, devoid of religious and political and personal opinions, so that you alone, you who are here and those who are listening, will be left to consider and to discuss with your friends, family, any lessons from this presentation which can be drawn for the present. So with your patience and with your understanding and with your interest, I would like to now present you Injustice Illuminated, the Holocaust art of Arthur Szyk. The Polish Jewish artist, Arthur Szyk, died in 1951 in New Canaan, Connecticut. And during the last year of his life, over 70 years ago, he illuminated this statement of Thomas Jefferson: "I've sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." Szyk, who was born in Lodz, Poland, one of the largest cities, second largest city in Poland, a textile town, in 1894, came to admire the American presidents. This Jewish young fellow living in Poland came to admire the American presidents, Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln, and the ideals of freedom that they represented for humanity at large. As such, they also served as his inspiration in his commitment to fighting against tyranny and oppression, directed against his own people, the Jews of Europe, their freedom and for justice. In 1933, in the very year that Hitler came to power in Germany, Arthur Szyk was invited, one Jew from Europe was invited to come to America in 1933. Arthur Szyk was invited to come to America for an exhibition of his works on freedom at the Library of Congress, and to be awarded the George Washington Bicentennial Medal by the Congress of the United States. Newspaper photographers on a cold and snowy December day greeted an already famous Arthur Szyk with his wife Julia, seen in the upper left, for he had previously been decorated for his works on freedom both in France in 1923 and in Poland in 1931, where he was given the highest honors that one could give a civilian. So here you have a Polish Jew being decorated in two of these countries in Europe, and now he comes to America, and he's going to be decorated with the George Washington Bicentennial Medal by the United States Congress. So when I talk about Arthur Szyk, I'm talking about a man who is famous, but not only famous in his own neighborhood or his own state or his own country, but was well known and famous and recognized for his works on freedom by worldwide. I might also add that an example of his paintings, 38 paintings of George Washington, there's 37 other paintings similar to this, dealing with George Washington and the American Revolution, were purchased by the President of Poland and given to President Roosevelt on the eve of World War II as a way of making a closer connection between Poland and the United States. Poland, of course, being invaded by both Germany and Russia in 1939. So Szyk's artwork was used to serve as the bridge. I might also add Some of you may be familiar of a speech called the Four Freedoms speech. I'm not quite sure, but in January of 1941, Roosevelt gave a talk for freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And that famous speech given 11 months before the United States was in the war had 38 paintings of freedom hanging in Roosevelt's White House. And those 38 paintings dealing with freedom were by this artist, Arthur Szyk. So he was well known both here and in Europe. So when I'm talking about an artist who created art dealing with the Holocaust, I'm talking about an artist who was well recognized and famous in his own day. I might also add to you that you would not be expected to know who this artist is before either Professor Kimball or an announcement that you heard brought this artist to your attention. Because after he died in 1951, he was virtually forgotten, a once famous artist forgotten, and I've sort of made it my mission over the past 30 years to try to figure out how you can make a once famous and forgotten artist famous again. And so that's what's led me on my sort of, let's call it a crusade in a positive sense, to bring an artist who fought for freedom and justice, to the fore again. That's led me to writing books and creating exhibitions and making movies and doing anything you can to make someone well known. While Szyk was here in the United States, he was asked about how life was in Europe, that is during this visit in 1933-34, when Hitler was in power for about a year and a half at the time, or about a year. And he was asked about what it was like to be a World War I soldier, which Szyk was. He was asked what it was like to be the director of art propaganda for Poland in its war against the Bolsheviks after World War I. Poland was at war with Soviet Russia. And this Jewish guy, this Jew, was the head of Polish propaganda in the war. And what it was like to be a successful book illustrator in Europe, where some of the most expensive illustrated books in France in the 1920s were made by Arthur Szyk. So here we have a man who had a career, who was being asked, and when he was here at that time, he was asked about what it meant to be a campaigner for democracy in Europe, how he worked as a fighter of anti-Semitism and a defender of Jewish rights. And so he was interviewed by a newspaper reporter who asked him what his mission was, and Szyk said right now that my mission as an artist, and especially a Jewish artist, cannot be neutral in these times. Our life is involved in a terrible tragedy, and I am resolved to serve my people with all of my art, with all of my talent, and with all of my knowledge. And note the date, 1934, that is 1 year after Adolf Hitler came to power. In July of 1934, 7 months after being here in America for 7 months, Arthur Szyk returned back to Poland, and it was then that he began to illustrate his famous Passover Haggadah. The Haggadah is the book Jews read at the holiday of Passover. It talks about their biblical slavery in Egypt and their liberation from bondage. And each year Jews tell the story, and Szyk illustrated that story. And here we see an image at the left, Jews at a family meal that's called the Seder, means the order of things. And on the right, almost like an illuminated manuscript, something you might think of from the 15th or 16th century, which is also an illustration here. Questions of, so Szyk began to illustrate the Haggadah, and he was conscious of his commitment to serve his people again, with all of his art and with all of his talent. But his Haggadah was different. This Haggadah that he illustrated, of which there's more than 5,000 different editions with commentaries that are different by languages and by different illustrators. But his was different from all other 4,999, if we were to take a round number. And why is that? And the answer is because Arthur Szyk in 1934 saw Hitler as the new Pharaoh, and the Nazis as the new Egyptians who had come to annihilate his people. So he had to make an ancient book of a historical book and place it in the contemporary world in which he was living. For he saw that the annihilation of the Jews in the 1930s, for him, was not only written on the wall, but he had to inscribe it and illuminate it in his texts. And what he saw is that here in the left-hand side, you see an image, a sketch, where Hitler there looks like Pharaoh, and that's Goering, the minister of the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, to his right. And you see on the slide on the right, on their parliament, their Reichstag, an illustration by Szyk showing Hitler with the Nazi salute in one hand and the olive branch of peace in the other. This is his work from 1935, and it appeared in a newspaper where he was in London, where Szyk was visiting at that time. Szyk's Haggadah also had illustrations such as this of 4 sons, because this book talks about 4 different kinds of people. Some people who don't care to understand anything, who don't give a damn. Those who aren't capable of knowing. They maybe know, but they don't want to get involved in the action. The son on the upper right, more astute, more wise. And the one on the top left corner, it was the wicked son, and Szyk put him with a Hitler-type mustache. As you can see, when you look at it, very German-esque, and part of the narrative that Szyk was trying to present to people who would be reading this book, which was a book over a 1,000-year-old book, but see it in contemporary terms. What Szyk also did is, in the Haggadah, he painted swastikas on the Egyptians in the Haggadah, and he painted over them prior to publication, because no one in Europe really wanted to touch a book that would have swastikas on them. So what you see over here is my attempt to try to highlight this with the pointer. But nonetheless, as you can see, this is drawn from here, and this is the way it appears in the book. You can't see a swastika. But I was putting together an exhibition at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I told them there were swastikas under layers of paint. They wanted to know, how did I know that, where Szyk had painted the swastikas? And I told them that I met an 80-year-old man in Tel Aviv one day, who that when he was a young person living in Poland, Szyk brought his artwork to his father, who was sponsoring the publication of this book. And he came down in the middle of the night when people were gathered around the table, and when he came down as an 8 or 9-year-old, he saw swastikas painted on his fingers. He told me that, and when there was an exhibition of Szyk's artwork at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, for which I was a consultant, I told them about that. They looked at this painting under special magnification and X-ray type capabilities, and we discovered swastikas that Szyk had painted, therefore trying to make this historic narrative a more contemporary one in his own time. That's a long way of explaining one image to try to drive across a point to you, but why should you understand it at its roots, at its core? That's the kind of artist that we're dealing with here, who wants to rescue European Jews during the Holocaust. His Haggadah was without parallel. This is the dedication page to King George VI of England. I don't know if any of you had seen the movie that came out a decade ago, maybe called The King's Speech. King George VI, he became King of England in 1936. When Szyk was finishing his illustrations here, he dedicated this book to the king. And he says here, "At the feet of your most gracious majesty, I humbly lay these works of my hands, shewing forth the afflictions of my people Israel." There were 3 other words that were added to this that he painted over, because somehow he either self-censored himself, or the people who were publishing it said, "Szyk, you can't say this." The other 3 words that appeared there were unaddressed and unavenged. So if you read this text, you would see, to the King of England, who's at the forefront of fighting Nazism, 5 years before the United States is in the war, Szyk is putting forth the afflictions of his people Israel that have not been addressed. Because this is a book that in its text says, I know it in Hebrew, I have to say it in English. In each and every generation, there are those who rise up against us to destroy us. And that is one of the messages that's in the Haggadah that Jews sort of tell every year, because in each generation, whether one goes back to the Assyrians and Babylonians, the ancient Greeks, or you go back to Rome or Persia, and beforehand in every generation. There's a great essay by Mark Twain about this, how the Jews, so small a number, ever survived all of the different iterations throughout history. Nonetheless, this is the introduction to his Haggadah. I wanted to share it with you. This is another page for the Haggadah. It's in Hebrew, and it's dedicated to the Jews of Germany and Austria after the Anschluss, after the Germans invaded Austria, and after Kristallnacht in 1938, which was the night of broken glass when synagogues and homes were destroyed and burned and looted, and Jews were begun to taken off to camps that had been established. This dedication page to them was never included in the Haggadah itself, but I located it not too long after I had published a new edition of this book, or around the time that I published a new edition of this book. In 1939, in September of 1939, you know, if I hold my hand up here, and this is Poland, you know, over here is Russia, right? And over here is Germany. So in September of 1939, Germany and Russia moved into Poland. And Szyk's presentation of that here is Poland greets its good neighbors. And because he created satire, and his satire moved from poking fun and making fun and calling attention through caricature to what was going on. Ultimately, his art turned he turns to become a hater of hate. This is a work that was published in a book here in America in 1941. I mentioned that the war broke out in 1939. Arthur Szyk was living in London at the time. And in 1939, the government of Poland moved from Poland to London. It was called the Polish Government in Exile. And that government, together with the British, helped sponsor Arthur Szyk coming to America to help bring the face of war in Europe to the Western world. You with me? You with me? Okay, you're hanging in there. Good for you. It's not easy to follow history in any sense, and then to follow a lecture of history at the end of the day, so I appreciate your being with me, even to the extent that you might pick out a thing here and there and come back. But I'm going to try to keep you with me here. We need to take a look at this. Again, this is a Polish soldier, and some of you might be familiar with the New Testament. This is what Szyk does. He turns some statements sometimes on their head. Father, do not forgive them, for they know what they do. And this is a soldier rescuing those who've been murdered. And there were more exhibitions in London, War and Kultur in Poland, showing you the culture that the Germans were now imposing upon the Poles and attacking that kind of new culture and restrictions upon the Polish people and the Jews who were in Poland. And when Szyk came to America, first he went to Canada in 1940, being sent here by the Polish government in exile, and the British newspapers carried articles that Hitler had put a personal price tag on Szyk's head, because that's how powerful his work was in Europe at the time. He went to Canada, newspapers carried articles that art must be mobilized, declares great Polish painter. Not just a painter, but in many headlines, he would be called the great Arthur Szyk, the great painter, the world famous, the world renowned, and here in Poland for a few months before he came to America. And this work of art here as well is important because this was published before America was in the war. Arthur Szyk telling the American public, pay attention, wake up to what's about to happen. Not you, not the person who was just yawning, I'm not talking about that. But wake up to what's going on in America. Look, Hitler's sitting at the throne. His feet are on a rug. The rug is the Untermensch, the subhuman, the Jew. And to the right, Uncle Sam, who's America, and John Bull, who's England, are in chains. Szyk's caption after drawing or creating this painting is "A Madman's Dream." This in American magazines, before America's in the war, Szyk is telling the American public, pay attention to what's going to happen. And if you don't pay attention, in another magazine, this work of art was published. Hitler as the Statue of Liberty, holding up the swastika, not the torch of freedom. This appeared in another magazine, in the American Mercury. The other one was in Coronet magazine, because his artwork here was appearing everywhere. This immigrant to America, who's fighting, that's serving as a citizen soldier of the free world, as Roosevelt's soldier in art, calling attention to the free world, what is on the doorsteps and what's about to happen. And this book was published in 1941, called The New Order. You know, the Nazis wanted to have their new order of things. And this was Szyk's attack upon them, showing the brutality of the Russians and the Germans, the murder of Jews and the bravery of the Poles at the time. That was the focus of this, 4 or 5 months before America was in the war. And these are the enemies of the Third Reich. These are the threat. These people on the left are a threat to Nazi Germany. We've got to kill them. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, where Szyk began to see the Japanese as the Nazis of the East. You may have read in some of your history books, you know, as racist as the Germans were, so too were the Japanese with regard to the Chinese and other Asians. Estimates are not quite clear that 10, 20, 25 billion Asians were killed by the Japanese. 20 million. And so Szyk saw them, who also formed part of the Axis with Nazi Germany, as if they were Nazis, and you'll see in his art many swastikas that are on them. And you might notice that some of his artwork might appear to be racist. And that would be within the context of the times, because you're going to get your American soldiers to fight against the enemy. You have to dehumanize them in the way that they've been carried out their atrocities, and you need to motivate the American forces to fight back. Here, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, it's Arthur Szyk's work that's on the cover of Time magazine, showing Admiral Yamamoto, the head of the Navy, on the cover. And magazines would have articles about Szyk showing him as a one-man war against Hitler. And there he is sitting on the balcony. He came to America. He moved and lived in Midtown Manhattan in the 60s. And then there he is. You can see him upper left-hand corner. And on the left-hand side, you'll see him with President Roosevelt's wife, but I don't like to refer to Eleanor Roosevelt as someone's wife. She was such a great individual in her own person. This is Eleanor Roosevelt, and you'll see the image on the far right, which Szyk completed in 1944. It was on the front cover of another magazine, and then in 1946 he gave it to Eleanor Roosevelt, and here you can see where he signs his name to Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt from Arthur Szyk, FDR's soldier in art. And then the covers for Collier's magazine. How many people here have heard of Norman Rockwell, the illustrator, who illustrated the covers of the Saturday Evening Post? While he was illustrating the covers of the Saturday Evening Post, Arthur Szyk was illustrating the covers of Collier's magazine. Here's a cover of Collier's. What was the circulation of the Saturday Evening Post? Everyone knew who Rockwell was? 3 million per copy. What was the circulation of Szyk's covers? 2.5 million. Everyone who saw Rockwell saw Szyk, but more people actually saw Szyk through his many exhibitions that were held at USO recreation bases and so on, more than 500 exhibitions at USO centers and more. And so Szyk in 1944 was interviewed for a press, and where he said, "The Jewish artist belongs to the Jewish people, and it is his mission to enhance the prestige of the Jews in the world. His task is to reveal to the world our glorious past and our tragic present." 1944. This would be typical. This would be a work that Szyk illustrated. It would be in a newspaper, because all of the works that he created were done for the purpose of reproduction. To be in newspapers, and to be in magazines, to be in flyers, to be throwaways at rallies, on ephemeral pieces of paper that everyone would be handed, but mostly in newspapers and magazines. And so here, this is a work of art which Szyk shows the Nazi leaders sitting around a table saying, "We've already killed 2 million Jews." This is 1943. It's been announced by the US State Department that 2 million Jews have been killed. And they're sitting around a table here, the Nazi leaders saying, "Oh, we've killed 2 million, we need more to kill." This would be Szyk's art, and in the upper right-hand corner, he dedicates it to his mother, who's been murdered somewhere in the ghettos of Europe. He didn't know where at the time. She was actually taken from the city of Lodz, and ultimately after the war, it was found out that she was murdered in the Chelmno killing center, and his brother also. Or this work of art, which was reproduced in many places, particularly the children who are in front. This sort of breaks my heart when I think about young people and war, terror. These are to be shot as dangerous enemies of the Third Reich. I want to pause for this because you've studied I understand that the studying of Nostra Aetate is part of your curriculum. And as I mentioned, I gave a talk about Arthur Szyk in front of Protestant, Catholic, Jesuit scholars and teachers at the 50th anniversary conference of Nostra Aetate. And this, I didn't hesitate to spend a little bit more time with this piece, because to my mind, this is not only Arthur Szyk's most important work of art dealing with the Holocaust, but I believe it's the single most important artwork created by any artist dealing with World War II and the persecution and the murder of Jews. So let me explain why I think that, okay? I don't want to stay by this microphone. Can you pick me up if I move for your streaming? You can? If I move over here?
You'll be fine.
It's okay? Fine. Okay, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
So this work is called De Profundis. De Profundis are the Latin words for out of the depths. Out of the depths I call to you from despair. Psalm 130 is very, very important to Jews and to Christians. It's in both liturgies of both peoples. So Szyk, by calling this piece De Profundis, is appealing to more than one audience. What do we see here when we look at it? When we look at it, we see lifeless and dying Jews. And we also see in the upper left-hand corner where Szyk has painted Jesus holding the Ten Commandments. As if to say, in 1943, if Jesus were alive, he too would have been killed as a Jew. Now, I'm going to pause for 1 second and tell you about two other artists you may have heard of, or two other works of art. In 1937, a painter named Picasso painted a work of art called Guernica to document the bombing of Guernica in Spain by the Nazis in 1937. It's a huge piece. If you go to Spain, you can go see it. It's huge. Runs from that wall, I don't know, where Professor Kimball was sitting, where Gloria's sitting. It's very long, very big. Documents human tragedy. In 1938, a year later, after Kristallnacht and the burning of synagogues and Jewish homes and Jews fleeing, another artist, a Jewish artist named Marc Chagall, did a drawing, a painting, a huge painting, a painting as big as half of this screen. Like this, half of the screen. It's of a burning synagogue, a burning house, a Jew fleeing, and in the center of the murder of Jews and the persecution, Chagall, the Jewish artist, paints a cross with Jesus on the cross in the center. It's a piece that's controversial for some Jews and for some Christians. Nonetheless, Chagall painted this in 38. Arthur Szyk painted this in 1943. What do all three of these works of art have in common? They have the theme in common that all of them are documenting human tragedy. But Szyk's work of art does something else that the other two do not do. And that is, by adding this phrase here of Cain, where is Abel thy brother, when you have the murder of the first children in the Bible, one brother kills another, and God calls out, Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And if one believes in divinity, and one believes that the knowledge of divinity is all-knowing, why would God have to ask Cain where his brother Abel is? Would not divinity know? And the answer is it's not for divinity, it's for Cain himself. Cain, where is Abel thy brother, means you've got to be held accountable for this, Cain. Justice needs to be meted out. And so what Szyk is saying here in this work of art is not only enough to document human tragedy, but who is to be held accountable. Now, keep in mind, this is a work of art that I present to diverse audiences throughout the world, and because it's a work of art that to Szyk and the world was very important. Now, one of the things I mentioned to you is that everything he did was for the purpose of reproduction. Not nice colors to match the sofa in your living room, not a landscape scene. Art is not my aim, it's my means, said Szyk. If everything that he did was for purpose of reproduction, where did this appear? And the answer is that in February of 1943, this appeared full page in the Chicago Sun, with the top half being this image, the image, and the bottom half having text. How does this get into the newspaper? Is it because the person who owns the newspaper, Chicago Sun, think that this should be placed in there? The answer is no. Is it the editor, one of the managing editors, decide it should be in the newspaper? No. Okay, which Jewish group paid for this? And the answer is no Jewish group paid for this. A Christian group paid for this. The Christian Textbook Commission, part of the Protestant Digest, paid for this to be in the newspaper. And what did they say down the bottom? What they said down the bottom in this text, if you were to read it, entitled The Voice of the Living Dead, because this is the way the page looked in the Chicago Sun. It said that because of the anti-Semitism that's been in our textbooks over the decades, we have to take responsibility for this. Because not only is this, and we need to look at the seeds of hatred that have been sown in civilization. Because not only is this anti-Semitic, and not only is it anti-American, but it's anti-Christian itself. And that's what the way Szyk's art was used. And this was reproduced in other newspapers, dialogues are held about it, and you can see that because of the message and because of the greatness of the art itself, we begin to understand its reproduction and discussion, why I consider it to be the single most important work dealing with the Holocaust produced on paper. That's deep proof of this. More time on this than anything else, but I think it's necessary to sort of give you some insight into this. And then, in 1943, the Jews have been rounded up. They're in the Warsaw Ghetto, and the Nazis move in with their troops, and Szyk creates these works of art. I'll tell you something else. That was created in 1943, this in 45. I was showing this work of art in Berlin. I curated an exhibition in Germany, where I thought that wouldn't that be something to have this anti-Nazi artist work shown there. We did. We arranged for high school kids who spoke English to come to the exhibit. We're standing in front of this work of art. There's about 300 kids, but at that time they were all milling around different places. So there was about a dozen kids standing with me in front of this, smart kids. And I was standing here and I read to them the inscription around the border, which I don't think you can see that well, maybe. It says, to the German, this is his dedication, to the German people, sons of Cain, be damned forever and ever, amen. And I'm standing with these German high school kids. I said, how does this make you feel? And the kids said to me, two of them, I'll never forget this, these kids said to me at the same time, this does not make us feel guilty, but it makes us feel responsible. Responsible that something like this shouldn't happen again. Now, does that mean that every German kid thinks that way? No, every Polish kid thinks that way. Every American kid who gets involved in activities that humankind wouldn't accept. Every Jewish kid? No. What it means is art has the power to engage. See, art has the power to communicate and for people to elicit responses that people examine their actions. You know, when the Germans kid said never again, unfortunately it happens again. And this was Arthur Szyk's response. This is 1943. This is ads that were taken out in the New York Times and Washington Post. Because, and its image is called Tears of Rage. And what you see here is a Jewish soldier who's holding a rifle. It's an American rifle, actually. Earlier, Szyk had painted soldiers as British rifles, but the British, Szyk had some other feelings about them. He chose to use helmets of Americans and its soldiers. But look, he's holding in his hands a dying or dead Jew who has a Nazi dagger in his back. At the bottom is a mother who's mourning the death and the murder of her child, maybe another generation here. And this was Arthur Szyk's response in art to that. You can see the rage that's coming through the death of his people. And you can see the ad that's taken out in the newspaper, which has the headline of "Action, Not Pity." You understand this is a fighting artist. These people are being murdered. There's a need to respond. That's his response. Does it make one comfortable? No. But does it determine, is it an attitude towards justice and towards a response? And so rallies were held throughout the United States. This art was on the cover of many pageants that were held in New York, and Chicago, and Boston, Washington, D.C., and Hollywood. And these booklets would be held out with Szyk's art on the cover. Poster stamps would be made, and they would be put on envelopes. And you would see here a ballad that was done by a Hollywood playwright. Anybody here ever hear of the movie Gone with the Wind? Maybe Gone with the Wind, I hope. Scarface, there was a writer of those, who was named Ben Hecht. He would write text with a group that Szyk was belonging to, and Szyk would illustrate the art. This is called The Ballad of the Doomed Jews of Europe. I'll just read the first 4 lines to spare you the reading of the entire text. 4 million Jews waiting for death. Oh, hang and burn, quiet Jews. Don't be bothersome, save your breath because the world is busy with other news. And that was the response. That was the world's response to what was going on in Europe as Szyk saw it. What you'll see is a German soldier here standing with a cannon who's firing at this woman who's on the telephone and making a plea call for help. While the cord goes up, wanders past Jews who are on gallows hanging, to the United Nations that's up there with the words United Nations there. The phone is next to it, has the word ring on it that nobody's picking up. And Szyk believed that every Jew that is now alive after the war is the legatee of those who died to uphold the sanctity of the name or the dignity of his origin. But after the war was over, Jews languished in camps in Austria and Germany, hoping that they would have some place to go. And in 1948, the State of Israel was declared by the people living in Israel, not something popular with its neighbors, in which the United Nations the year before partitioned Palestine in 1947 into 2 states, an Arab and Jewish state. Israel declared independence and 5 Arab nations went to war with the Jewish state. This is its proclamation of independence, which also states that we hope to live in peace with those who are our neighbors. And this is Szyk's illustration of this, a work of art, 1948. He created other works of art for the Jewish state. It's Israel bonds to help raise money for the needs of the new country. You know, this work of art doesn't look like much. It's a rose. It's got thorns. To get to the beauty of the rose, you have to confront the thorns. The phrase is a Hebrew phrase from the Bible, and God took us out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm with the word, in big print, Yiskor, which means remember. Remember. In 2002, an exhibition of Arthur Szyk's artwork was held at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Rather than read to you the paragraph text that I have in my presentation accompanying this, suffice it to say that in the introduction there was a reference to Arthur Szyk as being a prophet in his own time. Have you studied prophets in the Bible? I'm not sure. Most people, young people, older people, have never studied the prophets of ancient Israel. What's the job of a prophet of an Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah in the Bible? A prophet's job is not to predict the future. A prophet's job is to tell you about the future so that what is in that future, you can do everything you can to make sure it doesn't happen. So if people are about to create wickedness in their own communities, somebody's got to warn people about that so they change their behavior. And a prophet's also called to be a witness, to testify to what's going on. And in the introduction of this catalog, Arthur Szyk is referred to as a prophet in his own time. It's not enough to say that we're prophets in terms of our responsibility, but to consider ourselves somehow the native Eve, that is, children of prophets who behave accordingly. And so here's Arthur Szyk, working at his desk, serving in the bottom left as a fighter, almost in a karate stance to take on evil. His Hebrews were under fire, wrote Ben Hecht, under torture, exterminated in lime pits and bonfires, and they did not change. They remained a people to be loved and admired. Their faces, fleeing from massacre now, were tense and still beautiful. There was never slovenly despair or hysterical agony in Szyk's dying Jews, but only courage and valor. If there was ever an artist who believed that an hour of valor was better than a lifetime of furtiveness and cringe, it was Szyk, just as the Irgun produced the first fighting Jews since Bar Kokhba for first century times. Szyk put him on paper for the first time. He died still drawing for the Jews. And this is my last slide. It is in his Passover Haggadah. It's in French, where Szyk says, in the first dedication page, he dedicates it to King George, at the feet of your most gracious majesty, I humbly lay these works of my hands. He signed it there, Arthur Szyk, Illuminator of Poland, because he loved Poland, not like the anti-Semitism there. Here, he does this other dedication page at the end, where he says, I'm but a Jew praying in art. If I've succeeded in any measure, if I've gained the power of reception among the elite of the world, I owe it all to the teachings, to the traditions, and the eternal virtues of my people. And he signs it, Arthur Szyk, Image d'Israël, Arthur Szyk, painter of Israel. Thank you. Well, it's a 40-minute talk or something like that. You did pretty well. Thanks for your listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. Great question.
What was the, so did these like illustrations come from a like Jewish book you said?
Haggadah? Yeah, some of the colorful ones, 3 or 4 of them came from that book. The others were works of art, small works of art that were reproduced in many, many different kinds of newspapers and in magazines and in journals. And these pictures, these would have appeared there. The original works of art were watercolor and gouache drawings, not oils on canvas. These are small pictures, illustrations, and then they're reproduced in magazines and newspapers. They came from a variety of places.
But they're the ones that had swastikas under them?
And not all of these had, no. There were some images. In one particular book called the Haggadah, there were pictures of swastikas there. He did paint swastikas on other images that weren't necessarily in that one book. Okay. I'm glad we could clarify that. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned the letter Nostra Aetate.
I mentioned
Nostra Aetate.
Nostra Aetate.
Yeah, from the Vatican II.
Yes.
And I think it's worth mentioning
Yes.
Seton Hall,
Yes.
one of our,
Seton Hill. Well,
Seton Hall here.
Yeah.
One of
yes.
our famous
Yes.
figures,
Yes.
Monsignor John Ostreicher, founded the Institute of Judeo-Christian Studies here, and he was key in drafting that. And he actually, well, he was born Jewish, converted, became a Catholic priest, but right here from Seton Hall, he was a key member of Vatican II, and he was one of the major drivers against anti-Semitism, and was the first Catholic document to actually denounce anti-Semitism and absolve the Jews of any unique responsibility of the crucifixion. And interestingly, Vatican II was started by Pope John XXIII. Today's his feast day, and right above us, there's a massive bust of that Pope. So,
Thank you for calling that to our attention.
so we have a close affinity and connection with the Jewish people here. So I really, otherwise I really enjoyed this talk. I didn't know anything about this artist, but I certainly want to learn more now.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, this is the most important reason for me to remember Seton Hall, not Nick Workman, and not because I confused it with Seton Hill, but certainly because of what you're saying, for sure. Thank you for your comments also. Anyone have any other questions? Happy to answer for you. Don't feel obligated. So, yeah, okay, go ahead.
How did this kind of strike your interest, and like how did you sort of get into
It's a good question.
this sort of thing?
Yeah, how did it strike my interest? Okay, so, you know, truth is I needed gifts. I'll make this short, take it in. I needed gifts for people in my wedding party. That's half a century ago almost, right? And I saw reproductions of his book in a bookstore. I bought those reproductions as gifts for people who were my best man and maid of honor and all that. Then I was a rabbi for 13 years where I had two congregations, one in Queens, New York, and another in Northern California near San Francisco. And then after 13 years, I was enough. I decided to leave. And I went to business. And my business was business of buying and selling rare books and documents and manuscripts for a living. Because people collect Persian rugs, they collect Chinese vases, they collect, you know, stamps. There are people who collect rare books. And I made a living at doing that. And when I was doing that, well, I started this business not with very much education or background or a collection. I just started it. It was successful. But I became interested in this artist when I rediscovered his art. The point here is that the more I told people about Arthur Szyk and what I believed about his art and his messages, and the more people didn't know who he was, the more it drove me forward to try to figure out how you could bring him to public attention again. Because I always thought that his messages, which were against racism and bigotry and intolerance, which were for justice and freedom, and to raise the prestige of the Jew in the world, and to be an advocate for humanity at large, I thought were always going to be valuable. Because we're always going to have evil in this world. We're always going to have injustice. So I thought, you know, this artist needs to be more well-known. So the way that I thought the best could happen is if I could find major museums that would start showing his artwork. And so I would call up different museums, and eventually this museum would have an exhibition, and this one would, and this one would. And I started to write. And when I became interested in Szyk, there were no books about Arthur Szyk. So where was I going to go? And the internet, believe it or not, was only 7 years old at the time that I got interested, so I couldn't go to the internet to read about him. So how was I going to get that? So here's the lesson. Here's the last thing that happened. All of his archives that he had, all the letters that he had, all the scrapbooks he kept, all the papers about his life, all the publications he had and everything, his daughter was going to throw them away. That was the key to all the information about how you could write about this artist. Turns out that someone bought this from her, who was another person who was interested. But George could not keep this going. He became interested more in the research. He wasn't well. He wanted me to buy all the archives and documents. After all, he wasn't Jewish. I was a rabbi or Jewish. He thought it'd be better. Szyk was a Jewish artist. I was the perfect fit for that. And I was in business. The problem was he wanted several $100,000. And I had, here's the crux of what I want to tell you. I had about $5,000 to my name, honestly. And I went to my wife, and I said, Marge, what do you think about taking out a second mortgage on our house? And I went to George Gooch, and I said to George, you know, would you take a third mortgage on my house? That means I'm borrowing money. You know, sometimes in life, you come to a position, you either side, you're going to go this way, you're going to ignore this way, you're not going to go. And I said to myself, I believe in this guy. What's the worst that could happen in America if we're borrowing money? The worst thing, nobody's going to throw me in prison. I just got to pay it back if I lost all this. So I borrowed a couple $100,000 and said to myself, I need this research material to write the first book about this artist. Because how's it going to get out there? And that's how I made a commitment. I said, this is the moment in my life to say, this is my stand. This is what I'm going to do because I believed in this. Here I am, Seton Hall. I mean, you're few in number, but that doesn't matter to me because every person here in this room has a story. Every one of you has your own story. And everyone's going to either use your story in some way, or they're going to use it in another. And I'm just, one guy who just believes in somebody who visually articulated through his art what I felt in words. So I believe in the power. So that's my way of sort of answering. Maybe long, but nonetheless. Yes, sir.
If you can give me one word to describe your experience within your education and all your experience, what would it be?
If I give one word, oh man, I wasn't asked that one ever. If I could say one word, which would summarize fulfillment.
Could you elaborate on
What's that?
that? Could you elaborate on that?
No, you asked me for the one word. If I could elaborate, I would tell you more than that, than just the one word to begin with. But you're a good student if you're asking to elaborate, because everything starts with the word, and there's always the commentary and the commentary. The answer is true. It's a journey. This is my life's journey. This is I was only kidding there. It's a journey. We all have this journey. You guys, men, women, you have your journey in front of you. I don't know. You're going to find paths. It isn't straight. It's not straight. It's crooked. It's crooked. Yeah.
What I hear, if you don't mind my elaborating.
On the,
Yeah,
well,
what I hear
yes.
is I hear curiosity and passion.
Well, thank you. Glory, glory.
Glory.
You must.
Curiosity and passion, and you can't be held back.
Yeah, you can't. If you're determined, doesn't matter. I started this book business, which is beginning. I never apprenticed with anyone, so I never studied how you go into business and how you learn that. And I didn't have any books to start a business with, and I had no money. I had nothing. But if you're determined sometimes, so I tell my kids, it doesn't matter. Just go for it. Just go for it. Was there one last question? And then
I see a big Wikipedia page here.
Oh, you're looking at Wikipedia page of Arthur
Of you,
Szyk.
of you.
Oh, of me?
So I see
Okay.
you had a lot of your collection went to Berkeley, but where can his artwork be seen here?
Where can you see his work? By the way, if you want to take a nice drive, the largest exhibition in 50 years of Arthur Szyk's artwork is taking place not too far from here, where you can go and see original artwork. Now, it's a drive for a day. I don't know how long it takes to get to Fairfield, Connecticut, but there's a Jesuit university, Fairfield University, that now has an exhibition of original Szyk art, original paintings there, that really is an opportunity in a generation really to see it. It's there until the middle of December. What happens to be shown is a collection that every work of art in there I owned. And then somebody very well-to-do purchased it and gave it as a gift to a museum that's owned by UC Berkeley in Berkeley, California. And they're now showing that. So I have the double blessing of not only making a living. Ben Franklin once said something. He said, Ben Franklin, Benny Franklin, your friend Benny. Ben Franklin once said, I'd be dishonest if I didn't say that as a result of doing good, I also did well. I was thinking about that. I believed in this, and it turned out that someone ended up buying all this. So, but yeah, you can go to Fairfield, Connecticut has an exhibit, and you can go see the artwork. I don't know how far away it is driving, probably a couple hours, I suspect, maybe an hour and a half or more. But there you go. I'm actually going up there a couple more times. I rented an apartment. Never mind. Okay, so that's what you say. Thank you very, very much. Really, my voice is just good. See, and
Gloria had just one.
question. Is there one more?
Yeah, this is kind of a
Go
brief
ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
I was wondering if there was a particular piece that you could remember from when you were first getting interested in him that really made you fall in love with his
Yeah,
work.
the first thing I remember is the book about the Passover story, the Passover Haggadah. The word Haggadah means telling, so it's the book the Jews use to tell the story of Passover. And that was the first thing I saw. That really kindled my interest. Then later I saw political art, I went like, oh my God, this Jewish artist did religious work, but now he's doing political work, and I believe basically that politics and religion do mix, because I think for me the Bible is basically a book about politics. What's right, what's wrong, what you have to do, who you have to get involved with, so that worked for me, and that's what set it off. All right, that was the question beyond the question, now it's all up to you to go out in the world, and I'm not changing your life in any way, but I'm just presenting you another man's life and telling his stories. Thank you very much.
Okay, and I hope that everybody feel as not just enlightened, you know, in your heads, but I just feel also my heart's been enlightened. And I just find, you know, today when I woke up, and I realized we have this lecture today. He said, what timing in terms of the theme and what's going on in the Middle East now. It's almost frightening, well, not almost, it is frightening, but the fact that the time would come together in such a way. I'm very grateful for your presence here. We're expecting maybe more professors, and maybe more students, but again, we had our own little incident here that I'm sure impacted our situation here. But I am a firm believer that it's not so much quantity as quality, and who knows what will come out of our encounter with what we've had today, and I'm sure something will. So I'm happy to see my students here as one, and I think Philip was here, but Philip, I guess, had to leave. So thank you so much, and please don't go without taking something back there. Okay, if you have to take it with you, please do that. Dean Crable has paid for it, so we don't want to leave it, you know, for the mice or
Your pockets
anything
are
like
big
that.
enough, throw a few
So
things
get
in,
one and
so
take
right,
some
right.
for the road. Thank you so much. Also, if you're interested in more of our programs, the ICR, Institute for Communication and Religion, we are on the College for Human Development, what's it called? College for Human Development, Culture and Media. We're on that website. Please excuse me, we're a new college, with a new name, and so we're all, you know, futzing around with the acronym. Okay, so College for Human Development, Culture and Media. Media and culture, which one is it? But we're in that, the ICR, we're in that college. So we have a wonderful program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.